Hey guys, in this video we've got the pre-bash checklist 101, and this is things you should look into before you take your cars out and bash. And this is geared towards new people, so if you're new to the hobby, check this out. First off, if you guys watch the channel, then you should recognize this Creighton over here. That one belongs to Robert, and I hate to throw Robert under the bus here, but he really wasn't paying a lot of attention to this, and he's done some pretty significant damage to it. And this damage is really maintenance based, and what it comes down to is, if you take a look at the bottom of this thing here, there we go. Right along here and right along here, these are the bolts that hold the drivetrain in place for the center differential. Notice the missing bolts here. So this whole thing is loose, and I'll get you a close-up in here and show you that in a bit here, but this whole system, motor and everything, look at this. It's all loose, it's all real rattly in there. And if you look here, this is the spur gear that the Pinion rides on, and it's trashed on the back side. And that's directly related to not going over the checklist and making sure things are the way they should be. In this video, we're going to go ahead and tear into that a little bit. We're not going to pull it apart, but we're going to explain why you need to do what you do. Let's get on with the list and sort of explain to you what you should look for before you go out and run. So first off, one thing that we want to take a good look at is the tires and wheels. Now, this isn't off of the Creighton, this is off the X-Max, but it's a good, nice, large tire to get a look at. And these spin really fast, even on this. These will spin and balloon up really large, and they do get big. One of the things you want to look at first is to make sure this nut on the front, the wheel nut right here, is good and snug. And you should be able to feel the serrated nut dig into the plastic a little bit when you start in on that. Also, once you've satisfied yourself that all the tires are good and tight on there, you want to check the bead and go around and pull it away and see. Now, this one here, we took it out and bashed it, and of course, the gluing came loose. And if you're headed out to go bashing, this will be detrimental because you won't be able to run this tire. It'll pop off all the time, and you could spit the foam out. What you want to have is when you pull on this, you want to see that the glue is still holding on the bead all the way around. And if you do have any issues there, get some glue on that first and make sure that these are going to be good and stout, because they need to hold up for the entire event, or basically your car sits in the truck and you watch the others play. All right, for simplicity, let's go ahead and use a different platform car here. Now this is still an Arma, but this one being 6S is a metal chassis, this one being 3S, and of course this is the 3S Typhon. But the 3S here, you can take a look inside of this and see it's laid out differently, and all these RC cars are unique to themselves. In other words, this is a 3S platform, the 4S is similar. All the cars in that platform are going to be like this, even though they've got different bodies, different tires, and different A-arms and things like that. The basic layout of the car is the same. And when you have a look at this, one thing you want to do is check your steering, make sure everything's nice and tight. There's not a lot of slop, not a lot of play in there. The wheels and tires are good and tight. We talked about that. But you want to take a look at how the wing mount is. Make sure everything's tight in here. Make sure that this is the slipper setup in the back. Make sure that's good, clean. Everything moves freely. The drive system in the center turns nice and easily. When you run this back and forth, you should be able to feel the spur gear against the Pinion, and it should feel nice and tight, but there should be just a little slop in that right there, so you can feel that little gap. That's what allows it to run freely. Those shouldn't be really tight in there. So if this turns nice and easy, turns all of those, that's good as far as that goes. You want to have a look at your drive axles. You want to take a look at all of your top rods, your steering links, and your shocks to see if anything's leaking there. If everything looks good in that category, then you're good all the way through as far as that goes. I would still recommend just drop a battery in it. Even if it's just on a storage charge, turn it on, make sure everything functions before you leave the house. It can be really tough when you take one of these connectors out and the batteries that you're running don't connect to these and you need an adapter. that really sucks to not be able to run a car because you don't have the adapter you need or the right type of battery. So make sure that everything goes together good. And on the bottom, take a really good look down in here and make sure all of these nuts and bolts that go down through here are tight and that none are missing. But alongside of that, there are other cars out there that are laid out differently. And this one here is the low C laser nut. I'm not going to stick with ARMA for the whole thing because this is about the cars in general, not the brand. So in this one here has a center differential in it. Okay, so it's not a slipper. This one actually has 3 differentials, front, middle, and rear. And you want to take a look in there and see if there's any wet spots in the chassis, and that can indicate a grease leak or a diff leak. And if you have leaking in your differentials, that means the fluid's coming out of them. That means something's loose in there. And that can destroy a differential really fast if the bolts that hold the diff itself together are loose. So if you have wet spots, make sure that you take a look at those. And if everything's nice and tight and it's just a wet spot because there's a leak in the bottom or something and you deem it okay, then it's okay. But just know that you've checked it first, because going out without checking it and rupturing something can be really costly. All right, so let's take a second and look at one of the metal chassis cars for a second. And this is the Typhon. This is the big brother to the 3S. And this one, we have converted, we put the TLR chassis on it. Now this is 70-75 aluminum. That's not important. The thing is, this is the straight right off of the TLR. This is a good one. Now, if you take a look in here, you can see where our nuts and bolts and everything are connected. These are all bolts on the bottom, but the nuts generally are up here in the tie rods. So you want to check and make sure all of those are tight when you move things around. Nothing shifts. If you can see this nut shift back and forth when you put pressure against it, it's loose. And that's not a good thing, because it will continue to egg out this hole. Now the thing is on this, right here on the bulkhead, it connects to the shock tower. And these connect to the shock tower. And a lot of the RC cars are the same way with this, where there's just a bolt through the shock tower with a nut on it. And there's a little castle socket that goes in there that this right here, the plastic bit, connects to. If that can walk, and what I mean by that is if this bolt right here can shift, it will slowly work a hole. In other words, the hole that's drilled for this bolt, it'll make it bigger over time as it vibrates. Then you'll have a hell of a time holding it tight, because this hole's no longer the right size. So keeping those good and tight makes a huge difference. And if you want to take a look at this, this is an old school, this is an ARMA center differential motor mount plate. And this is out of, I believe it's the Creighton version 2 or 3. And the thing is generally with the newer ones, it's got an aluminum plate here. So this is where the motor mounts, and the differential goes through this hole here. And this is aluminum. Okay, now the cool thing about that is with aluminum, it's the same thing. If this is loose, now you probably can't see this on the camera, but this moves. Okay, this one's been loose a little bit. And so even with the screw threads in there, it's relatively loose. Okay, that's not a good thing, but that's usually manufacturer, the way they do things there. So when you thread these down in, if they're still kind of loose there, this is aluminum and steel. Okay, get some Loctite on there right away and run it down in there. Now, the thing about that is, and what we've noticed is the stainless steel bolts, this is a stainless steel screw here, and we bought the kit because stainless steel doesn't rust. However, it is softer. So what we found out is with the stainless steel ones, when you put thread locker on here, you try to get them off. You put a wrench on this and give it some love and try to get it loose, it strips the heads out because it's not nearly as strong as the regular iron ones. The steel ones are a lot stronger than these ones as far as that goes. But when you get some torque on there and you can feel it really fighting you, there's a way to get that off. So heat does the job on Loctite or thread locker basically. So you heat up the bolt, get it nice and warm, it'll melt into that thread locker and it'll come off nice and easy. The problem being when you switch over to the motor, and that would be this part here. This is a Pinion, okay? And we've had trouble keeping this, and this is a small one, this is off of a different car altogether, but we've had trouble keeping this one on. And the problem is, if you see, I'm in the grub screw right now, but look how it walks. See how that walks back and forth in there? And it's tight in the grub screw. So the wrench is not loose in here. The grub screw is loose in the pinion, and it can crank all the way in nice and easy, all the way out nice and easy, and it's good enough you can get it tight, but the threads in the pinion itself are not quite to gauge. In other words, they're a little looser than they should be. So you figure, okay, I'm going to put some Loctite on there and it's going to be good to go. So you put some Loctite on the grub screw and you crank it down in there and you get it tight and you let it sit until it sets. We just talked about how that works as far as heat, right? So this is a pinion. This pinion goes right on the motor shaft. All right, so that being said, the motor itself creates heat when you use it. So when you're under high horsepower and you're pulling on the battery good, the motor heats up. It heats the center shaft, which heats the pinion. There's also friction between the pinion and the spur gear, which also adds heat. Loosens the Loctite. Okay, here's the problem with that. The reason we can't keep this one on is the threads actually in the pinion are not up to spec. So this is kind of a loose grub screw in there. And so as it heats up, as the temperature rises on the pinion because of the heat from the motor and the friction and whatnot, this loosens up and it spits this off. Get another one, check it. If the threads are nice and snug and it doesn't wobble and walk like this one does, get some thread locker on that and put it in, snug it down, let it wait until the thread locker sets up, and you should have no problems with this. It's an issue that a lot of people have mentioned about these things. I'm having problems keeping my pinion tight. I keep losing my pinion and so on. This pops up in the comments every once in a while, and that's really what it comes down to. If these, when I've worked in the machine shops and I know how this works, if you get a tap going down through there and it gets debris in there, it can actually make the threads a little bigger because it'll have debris in there and it won't actually get the right size. And it happens everywhere. It's not just, you know, that one manufacturer is doing a poor job. Sometimes it gets through the system and you don't realize it and they're just a little bit looser than the others. Those ones generally are the ones that are going to come loose. And keep in mind, guys, this is our opinion, but we've had a lot of experience with this and we've found that if you take that one off and put one on that the threads are better, they generally hold. All right, so let's take a second to talk about the differentials and that kind of thing, the inner workings of the front, the rear, and the center. And generally in this type of car, you have a pumpkin set that's something like this. It has two outdrive units here and an input shaft, and it turns these gears inside. And that's good. If these things are working okay, there's not a problem. But notice how the bottom's open on this one. And this sits down into the chassis like so, and you generally put a nice dose of lubrication in here. I like to use this kind. So it's just a lithium grease. It's a white grease, so you can really tell if you got it on good. The brand isn't overly important. It's that you get the grease in here to get some lubrication on these that'll help these hold. Now, if this starts to leak out on the chassis, and we've got one right here, this will sit on the chassis like this, and it mounts right down in that fashion. So it sits nice and tight down on the bottom. If you get leakage, you're going to have a wet spot here on the chassis, and it'll be wet here. It may be wet underneath as well, because that can leak. Now, that could indicate a couple of things. You're loose, and this isn't tightened down to this the way it should be, and therefore it's going to leak. And that means that dirt and debris can also get up inside. So if you do have a wet spot, first thing you want to do is check these bolts here and make sure all of them are tight. Now, if that's tight and you're not leaking out of that, the next thing you should check, and this is a center differential, but that's not important. They're built the same way. This just has a straight cut gear, and the other ones are built differently on the ring gear part, or the spur gear area. So the idea is there's 4 screws here on each one. They're all built the same way as far as that goes. If these screws start to back out, you'll get weepage at the screws here, and you can get weepage where this comes in with the bell, so where it connects this way. If this loosens up, you're going to get leakage out of there. And if you're getting leakage, find out why it's leaking, because if it's loose enough to leak, those gears inside can loosen up and you can blow the differential out. So you want to make sure these are good and tight as well. And one last item before you're ready to go out and bash. And you know, if your car's been sitting a while, debris can get in the bearings. Now, I've heard people in the comments argue that the bearings are sealed and all that stuff. Okay. They say they can't corrode and all this other stuff. They can freeze all the way up and be locked solid. It happens. And you can take a bearing, like any of the 3 bearings in here. You've got one on each of the output shafts and you've got the input shaft bearing. Any of these bearings can lock up on you. And I have personally been able to spray some lubricant on there and work them back and forth and get them to function. Not all bearings are sealed, and not all sealed bearings are sealed tight. These are not automotive bearings, guys. These are just RC car bearings, and those are much more like a dust cover. You can get lubrication in them by spraying it straight on them. We've done this here for a long time, and it does work. So if these have sat for a long time, you're going to want to get some lubrication on there first to make sure all your bearings run good, because a lubricated bearing will run without heat, or at least not nearly as much heat as it would have if you ran it dry. These need to have something in them. If you're just going out to blast, the cool thing about it is if you use some of this stuff, and again, the brand is not important, but this is a silicone lubricant, this stuff dries. Okay, so when you spray it on it, it can wash all the dirt and debris out of the bearings, and then this stuff dries and it doesn't attract dust. In the short term, that's really good. However, if you're going to store it for any length of time, I recommend using this stuff on the bearings while it's being stored. This is Multi-Max. It's a synthetic oil and it does stay on the bearings. So in storage, that does a great job of keeping everything lubed up so it won't corrode or any of that thing. Before you go out and run it, give it a blast of this, rinse some of that oil out so it doesn't attract too much dirt and debris into the bearings, and you should be good to go. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. It's awesome when you do, and it lets us know whether you like what we're doing here at the channel or not. You know, this is a great hobby to be in, and it's real easy to overlook the small things that make things work. These aren't just toys, they're machines. And machines require maintenance, especially something that takes such a rugged beating as these things do. These are amazing. The RC hobby has escalated so high from where we started to what these will take today. And they just seem to get tougher and tougher as time goes on. But the parts that wear, the drive cups, the gearing, all of that stuff, the bearings, you can blow bearings on the regular if you don't keep them lubed up and clean. They will wear just like any other normal part. So good, proper maintenance makes a huge difference. You know, if you guys have anything you want to add to this video, be it positive, negative, whatever, if you think it's important before you go out and bash, besides, you know, take your toolkit and all that stuff, please feel free to leave it in the comments down below and help others along the way. Hey guys, I'm AJ with AJ Jam Studios saying, keep bashing, guys.